All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are jumping right into a puzzle that has, no exaggeration, shaped the world we live in. How is it that one single book, read by billions of people, can lead to so many different and, let's be honest, often conflicting meanings?
I mean, really think about it. How did the one book end up as the foundation for thousands of different denominations, countless theological arguments, and some of the most deeply held and yet contradictory beliefs out there? It's a genuine mystery, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
And believe me, the stakes are incredibly high. As this scholar points out, if you decide that meaning is just, totally up to the reader, then there's no real way to say any interpretation is right or wrong. Orthodox, heretical, it all becomes the same. So how do we find any solid ground? Well, to answer that, we first need to learn the rules of interpretation.
And yes, there's a formal name for this whole process. It's called hermeneutics. The best way to think about it is that it's part science, because there are actual rules and methods you can follow, and it's part art, since understanding any language, especially an ancient one, is always going to be nuanced. It's basically the toolkit we need to build a bridge from their world, thousands of years ago, to ours.
Here's an analogy I find super helpful. Think of reading the Bible like you're sitting down to play a card game. Before you can even think about playing your hand, you've got to know two things. First, what game are we even playing? Is it poker? Is it hearts? And second, what are the rules of that specific game? Well, biblical interpretation works exactly the same way.
And trust me, the rules of this game have been argued about for centuries. I mean, just look at this timeline. The focus has shifted like crazy. You have ancient Jewish interpretation that valued the literal, but also used allegory. The early church came along and developed this really complex fourfold sense of meaning. Then, boom, the Reformation happens, and the pendulum swings hard back to finding the one single meaning the author intended. And now, in the modern era, the focus has shifted again, this time putting the reader front and center, sometimes even questioning if a stable meaning can exist at all. It's this constant tug of war between the text, the author, and the reader.
So, with all that history, where do we start? What's the absolute first rule of the game? It's simple, and it is totally non-negotiable. Context is king, every single time. A word gets its meaning from its sentence, a sentence from its paragraph, and that paragraph from the book it's in. Ignoring this one rule is probably the #1 cause of almost all misinterpretation.
Now, this brings us to this really foundational idea called the hermeneutical circle. I know, it sounds kind of like a brain-twisting paradox, right? You can't understand a single verse without knowing the whole book, but you can't understand the whole book without first understanding the verses. But here's the point. It shows that interpretation is a process, kind of like a spiral. You're constantly moving from the little details to the big picture and then back again. And with each loop, your understanding gets sharper and clearer.
And this circle is exactly why proof texting is so incredibly dangerous. You know what I'm talking about? When someone just yanks a single verse completely out of its home to try and prove a point. A verse without its context is like a single line from a movie without the rest of the film. You can make it mean almost anything you want.
Okay, a huge part of understanding context is knowing the difference between what's descriptive and what's prescriptive. Descriptive text is just that. It describes what happened. Think of the stories in the book of Acts. Prescriptive text, on the other hand, prescribes what you should do, like the direct commands you find in the letters to the churches. The key takeaway? Just because the Bible describes something happening doesn't mean it's a command for you to go and do it. This all leads us right into the second big rule. You have to know what game you're playing. And that's because the Bible isn't one book, it's a library. I mean, just look at this literary mix. Almost half of it is historical storytelling, but then you've got huge chunks of prophecy, tons of poetry, and all these personal letters. You just can't read them all with the exact same set of rules.
And each of these different types of writing, these genres, is a totally different game with its own rulebook. For instance, if you treat a proverb, which is a general principle for living wisely, like it's an ironclad, 100% guaranteed promise from God, you're going to get really confused and disappointed. Or if you read a personal letter written to solve a specific crisis in one church as if it's a universal law for every person for all of time, you can make some really big mistakes. The genre always sets the rules of engagement.
Okay, so you've learned the basic rules of the game.
context, and genre. Now we get to move up to the highest level of strategy. It's time to talk about theology.
Theological analysis is basically where we zoom all the way out. We take that one little passage we've been studying, our one puzzle piece, and we ask the big question, how does this piece fit into the final picture on the box lid? It's all about making sure that our interpretation of this one small part doesn't completely contradict the Bible's huge overarching story about who God is and what His plan is.
And to build this big picture, theologians often use these huge systematic playbooks. Here are two of the most popular ones. Now just look at the core difference here. Covenant theology puts all its emphasis on the continuity of God's plan through history. Dispensational theology, on the other hand, emphasizes the discontinuity, the different ways God has worked. And that one starting point, especially on whether the church and Israel are one continuous people or two distinct groups, it creates this massive fork in the road. It will radically change how you read and understand God's promises and prophecies throughout the entire Bible.
Now, this isn't just random. It's a really rigorous process. It goes something like this. You start with a hypothesis, a tentative view on the big picture. You test that idea against the specific passage you're reading. Then, and this is so important, you have to ask what the original audience could have possibly known at their point in history. Then, and only then, do you bring in later revelation, like the teachings of Jesus or Paul, to see how that new information adds layers of meaning. It's a really careful, almost detective-like process.
So, we've talked about the text itself, the rules of the game, and even the master strategy. But there is one final, absolutely crucial piece of this puzzle we have to talk about. And it's not in the book, it's the player. It's you.
Let's be real. Nobody, and I mean nobody, comes to this book as a blank slate. We all bring our own biases, our culture, our past experiences, our assumptions. The goal isn't to pretend they don't exist. That's just impossible. The goal, as this quote says so well, is to be conscious of them. It's about knowing what kind of glasses you're wearing when you read and then being willing to adjust them or even take them off if the text itself shows you a different picture.
So how do we actually do this? How do we bridge that huge 2,000-year gap between their world and ours? Well, it's basically a three-step dance. First, you have to find the timeless principle behind the original text. So for example, a command to greet someone with a holy kiss. The principle isn't about the kiss itself, it's about warmly and sincerely welcoming others as family. Step 2, you ask, does that original behavior still work today? In many cultures, a kiss isn't a normal greeting between friends, so maybe not. That leads to step 3, you find the modern equivalent. What action does express that same principle in our world? Maybe a firm handshake or a hug. That's how you faithfully move from an ancient text to a modern life.
Because when you get right down to it, this isn't just some academic game. The goal isn't just to be a hearer of the word, to collect cool facts and win arguments. The entire point of all this careful hard work is to become a doer. The goal has always been a changed life.
So here's the bottom line. Interpretation is not a free-for-all. It isn't just whatever it means to you. It's a discipline. It's a skill that can be learned and improved. The rules are out there, the strategies make sense, and now that you've been introduced to them, really the only question left is, how are you going to play the game?